Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we are going to talk about cards that could use with some love, that could use with a buff as a follow-up to yesterday's video where I talked about cards that could use with a nerf. Now it's time to talk about perhaps the more exciting part, and that is buffs. Now, you know, people will always say with any balance patch, oh, they haven't had that long to sort of think about, you know, to see the meta, like, you know, because of the 2-week thing, so, you know, maybe they won't nerf everything that we want them to, and that's fair, you know, that's very fair, valid point, that, you know, they literally can't nerf, like, an Akshan or Viego, because those cards have just come out, and by the time that they were coming out, like, you know, they would have had to predict it beforehand that they would be too strong, and then nerf them, which, you know, unless something like crazy happened, like if one of them broke the game, I don't think would be the case. So, let's talk about things that they could do, though, which is buff, because there's plenty of cards that have existed for a very long time, you know, that have been sitting around for a long time, that they could always buff. So when it comes to buffs, you know, there isn't that much of an excuse as to why you can't buff certain things that have been in the game now for quite some time. So let's dive in, shall we, and start this thing off. So today I'm mostly going to focus on champions, but I do have one non-champion change suggestion, and that is Pale Cascade. And this kind of follows on from what I was saying yesterday about how I think my opinion, and I think sort of just by looking at the game for quite some time, probably what the devs start to think as well, is that every region should have like certain cards that are like considered S tier cards. You know, cards that are like just mostly auto-include within a certain region. Like, you know, they do what the region is kind of wanting them to. My example was Ravenous Flock, which is a very Noxian spell. You know, it's conditional removal that is very strong. But it's even stronger than like the other ones, you know, it's even more push than those at 1 mana, but it's a good example of like what Noxus is trying to do. You know, it says the word stun on it, it says the word damage on it, it's conditional removal, it's very Noxian in its design, and therefore it's pushed to be like, play this card, because it's a very Noxian card. Well, Pale Cascade was Targon's. I think when Targon came out, this was sort of the card that they were like, here we go, this is, you know, this is Targon, it's a combat trick, you know, this is like a region that has ways of keeping your units alive. That's kind of one of the main points. It has draw effects in it. It has Nightfall on the card as well. So I feel like this is the card that, you know, they really did, you know, they knew that this was a push card. They knew that this was probably better than pretty much any other combat trick in the game when it came out. And, well, they nerfed it because, you know, it was probably the strongest card in the game for some time. And so rightfully nerfed it, but then that kind of left a bit of a hole within Targon where now there kind of isn't any like S tier card. There are some good cards, but I really do think that they kind of had the intention of Hush. You know, Hush in its old form was, of course, I mean, broken in a different way, but also very strong. And I feel like Hush and Pale Cascade were the two cards they were like, well, this is Targon. Welcome to Targon. Now, Hush I don't want to revert for good reasons. But Pale Cascade, I think, could. And I don't think it would affect the game that much. And I think it would have a very positive impact for Targon as a whole. Not only does this card, you know, just help the entire region, of course, because now all of a sudden you have a very... I mean, it probably would, again, become the strongest combat trick in the game, because, you know, not only is it a solid combat trick, but also the draw one is really, really good. So it probably would become the best, you know, combat trick in the game, which would be good for Targon because it's a region that's lacking quite a lot right now. But also it would help Nightfall, of course, and Diana. Of course, it is Diana's signature spell, so as soon as you change this, you know, you buff Diana pretty greatly by doing this, and you help Nightfall in general because, of course, this is a very Nightfall spell. So if you give them a really good, you know, a really good card that's going to be played in every Nightfall deck as a 6/5 of basically, because it's going to be Diana's signature spell as well, then that, you know, just really just helps the whole thing. And I think Nightfall is one of those archetypes that people like, but hasn't been great recently. So it would be nice to see it back, you know, coming back to the fray. And I think that by buffing Pale Cascade, you can do a lot of good for Targon and, you know, basically, you know, tell people, hey, play Targon again. Even though personally I don't like Targon, but I do think this would be a good change for the game. So now let's move on to the champions, and when it comes to the champions, you know, there's a lot of different champions that you could buff. I've got 10 different changes here for, you know, a bunch of different champions. I'm focusing on 10 of them. And basically, there will be ones that you're like, Chris, why did you not, you know, touch this? This is something that, you know, you could have talked about. Some of them are sort of more significant. Others are like, you know, just a stat change or whatever. But basically, if I couldn't come up with like an idea that I liked, you know, then I'm not going to include it. So it's not that I don't think that some of these champions do need buffs, and, you know, you'll all be able to mention some, I'm sure, that, you know, you're like, why didn't you mention this? It's just that if I couldn't think of something that I was like, oh, that would be, you know, a good idea, then they probably won't be in this video. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily don't need a buff. You know, you might have a really good idea for how to buff a certain champion, but if I didn't come up with it, then, you know, I can't include it in this video. So with that said, let's dive into our first champion, and that is Zillion for today. Now, Zillion, I'm sure, is a champion that most people can agree, like, oh yeah, this is a good target for a buff. Hasn't really seen much play, you know, since he came out. The whole predict archetype wasn't really a success. And, you know, I made a video about this, that, like, the predict champions feel like they're in, like, the opposite regions to what they should be, which is also kind of weird. But Zillion, let's talk about Zillion, and how we can potentially change Zillion. Now, what I would do personally is, I mean, I don't think Zillion is that bad. I'll be honest. I think Zillion isn't that, like, he's not terrible. He's not that far off. He has a lot of the things that, like, you know, are actually okay for a champion. Like, a 2 mana, you know, a 2 mana 1/4 is a fine stat line. So he's clicking the right buttons there. He's a 2 mana champion, and generally the lower mana champions are going to be more successful because, you know, they're sort of easier to put into a deck. You don't need to think about how am I getting to turn 8 or 9 or whatever. So he has some help there. He does something as a play effect, which, you know, is also pretty good. His level up effect as well can be pretty significant, you know, if he stays on the board, and because he has a high health stat, he will probably stay on the board somewhat. I just think that other things potentially are lacking. His champion spell, for instance, and I think we can also change the time bomb. So what I would do for Zillion is I would make the time bombs 1 mana. This would obviously help quite a bit, because now, like, the time bombs now at 1 mana become, like, extremely good cards. You know, they become cards that, like, you want infinite amount of because they're so good, you know. They deal 1 to the enemies in the enemy nexus. They only cost 1 mana. You're drawing a card as well. So Zillion is now, instead of creating, like, decent cards, he's creating, like, really good cards that you would honestly want to just keep copying, if you could. Because a 1 mana draw 1 that deals 1 to everything on the other side of the board is, like, really quite good. And so I think that would be a pretty big help. And what if Zillion could create 5 time bombs instead of 4, you know? So it just made that likelihood of him getting that first time bomb, you know, early on, quite likely. You know, you just up the odds ever so slightly in his favor. And I think that between those two changes, Zillion would become a champion that you would consider in a lot of different decks. And Zillion's, like, because Zillion isn't tied to predict like Echo is, you know, he probably wants some predict, but he's not tied to it. You can do a lot with Zillion. There's a lot of different things that you could do. Of course, you could go, like, Twisted Fate, you could go Noxus, you could go Piltover and Zorn, of course, with predict, or probably without predict as well, to be honest. There's a lot of different, like, you know, you could go for a stall deck that just aims to win with time bombs. You know, there's a lot of things that Zillion can do in this game, I think. And so Zillion is one of those champions that I kind of want to see be good, because I think he's, like, interesting. It wouldn't feel necessarily oppressive, I don't think, but I think it'd be interesting, and there'd be a lot of different things that you could do with Zillion. So I really do think of probably all the champions. I do hope that Zillion does get buffed of kind of all of them, but that's my take. Onto the bad boy of this game, and it is Aphelios, and whoa, there's going to be a lot of interesting conversations about this one. You know, some people think that the moon weapon should go back to 2 mana. I'm sure that most of you probably understand that that is a bad idea. You know, there are people out there, particularly on Reddit, who say, you know, that, oh, Aphelios was never the problem. It was the Veiled Temple was the problem. I don't know about you guys, but I don't remember the Veiled Temple, like, creating you know, multiple cards every turn and, you know, helping you win the game basically off the back of that. I don't quite remember that, but maybe that's what the Veiled Temple used to do, but I don't think it did. I'm pretty sure it was this card that used to just consistently create absolute mega value for you and essentially close out games on its own. And so with that said, I would not change the moon weapons back to 2 mana. What I would do, I think, is I would up the sort of level of the two blades that give, you know, the stats and the keywords. I think that those are the two that really need some help, that really aren't worth, you know, the 3 mana cost. You know, Calibrum is essentially a Thermo Beam, which is a good card anyway, and you know if it's going to be good if you can kill something, you know, a follower with this. So Calibrum I think is fine. Gravitum is, you know, more situationally good, but, you know, can potentially win you a game sometime. You know, if you can stop that attack from that big unit they've got on the board, you know, this can sometimes win you a game. So I think that it's honestly fine as it is as well. And Crescendum can, you know, I mean, at its best, can summon you a 3 mana 3/4, a 2 mana 3/4 challenger. Or, you know, you want to use this in a way that makes sense, and you can use this in a way that makes sense. There are plenty of 2-drops that, like, if you can guaranteed summon them, are worth 3 mana. Eye of the Dragon. Tyrian Sumpworker even, you know, you could use this as like a combo to get that and get out your Sumpwork posse, you know, more reliably. That's another great use of it. Boxtopus obviously was the one that kind of, you know, broke the camel's back. Ballistic Bot is, you know, another 2-drop that is perfectly fine to summon with this as well to give you just extra value. So there's plenty of good uses for Crescendum that I don't think that needs changing. But the two other blades I think you could do, and I think to make these worth it, what you could say is just Grant. Now you probably want less stats on these two blades. You know, maybe this one just gives like 1 health and this one just gives like 1 attack instead, but Grant's the keyword. I think that could be something that would be quite interesting, to be honest. I think that, you know, Aphelios, all of a sudden you're thinking like, what can I give Overwhelm to that, you know, would be really useful? And that could be, you know, you could create some cool decks with that, I think, if these were Grant effects. And, you know, obviously the flexibility. I don't want to make these too strong. I wouldn't keep the same amount of stat gain because I would worry that might be too strong, I'll be honest. Because of the flexibility of Aphelios in general, you know, like, oh, I'm losing, so I'll just grant, you know, my big unit lifesteal. Oh, I'm winning, I'll just grant my big unit overwhelm. Like, I don't want to go crazy with it and give them extra stats as well, or too much extra stats. But I do think that granting would make all of the moon weapons, you know, somewhat worth 3 mana. And I think that is, you know, where we want to be, and that would probably, hopefully, make Aphelios a champion that is, like, good, but not oppressive, and also not terrible at the same time, which unfortunately, you know, he's kind of existed on those 2 levels at the moment. I just want to see Aphelios be, you know, a perfectly fine choice, and I hope that that's what would do it. I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to keep doing this one until they eventually do it. And that is Katarina. And I've said this a million times now at this point, but Katarina just needs to be 2 mana. This side needs to be 2 mana. I've seen people like wonder why Katarina needs to be 4 mana on this side, and the reason is, you know, and I'm sure they still think this, that, you know, rallying 3 times in one turn, you know, and potentially attacking 4 times in one turn, whilst it has been done by, you know, Blade Dance, but, you know, attacking with a full proper board 4 times potentially in one turn isn't exactly where they want to be, I think, with this game. And I think they understand that people would probably quickly get frustrated with that. So I do think that having Katarina's leveled up form at 4 mana is a good idea. But I also think that Katarina at 2 mana would be, you know, worth it. Now, I've said before that maybe you can get rid of the Blade's Edge if that is the case, which I would be perfectly fine with. If they just make Katarina 2 mana on this first side, get rid of the whole Blade's Edge effect, which wasn't Katarina's initial design. She didn't use to have this summon a fleeing Blade's Edge, if you aren't aware. But by making a 2 mana, basically the problem Katarina has is that she's too big of a tempo loss. It's like playing Rek'Sai before you can level him up. But imagine if Rek'Sai just dealt 3 down. Imagine you play Rek'Sai, but you miss Lurk as well, like before you can level him up. You know, it's such a big tempo loss that you just can't really get away with it. And so Katarina, but by making it 2 mana, you probably can get away with it all of a sudden. You know, there are a lot of decks that will pass on 2 and not really have much to do with on those early turns. So by making it 2 mana, by getting a leveled up, you know, there's already some things with Shurima that you can do, because if, you know, you can guarantee level the champion by turn 2, then, you know, all of those cards in Shurima that say once you've leveled the champion become a lot better. So there'd be, you know, good synergies there already. There'd be plenty of different decks that I could see Katarina then going in. because now all of a sudden she's not this major tempo loss, because there's something about this number 3 that is really important in this game, because turn 3 is where every deck has to start, because, you know, you don't want to pass on turn 3, you know, because then you're just wasting your mana, essentially. You know, you don't want to pass 1, 2, and 3. You want to be playing something by turn 3, and so by having this on turn 3, like, you're essentially paying 3 mana to deal 3 to face, like, that really doesn't do that much, and then you probably have to wait another, like, 5 to 6 turns to play Katarina's leveled up form. Like, it just doesn't work. But if she was 2 mana, you can just play this on 2, you know, and then you can wait, and you could basically hold up a I have a rally at any time card, you know, be careful what you do, which I think would be a pretty significant threat. Now, someone suggested this to me in the comments of yesterday's video, and I thought it was a good idea. You know, and I would just give Soraka the extra 1 attack. I'd make her 2 attack so that she could trade better with other things. She'd be pretty strong, I think, with 2 attack, because now, you know, you like a 3 mana 2/6 is like a solid. It's not like, you know, that's difficult to deal with a lot of decks. But I'm actually okay with that, because I feel like Soraka Tahm Kench is kind of, it's one of those archetypes that's kind of disappeared by the wayside. You know, when they introduce those little cards, like, you know, like if a region isn't getting like a champion, they'll just like give it like a couple cards. And certain archetypes, like Discard seems to get one like every time. Like the Piltover and Zone card is always a discard card. I don't know why, but it always is. But like Soraka and Tahm Kench, like, have had their initial batch, and then they've kind of just been left and kind of forgotten, I think. Someone at Riot definitely loves discard aggro. Because they keep making discard cards, but I feel like that's what this needs. It needs like just a little reminder of, oh yeah, remember Soraka Tahm Kench? Well, now, you know, Soraka is like really hard for like aggro decks to deal with, like insanely hard for any aggro deck to deal with, which I think would be nice. I think it would be nice to have, you know, we've had kind of an aggressive meta for some time, so I think it would be nice to have like something that says, hold on, wait, you know, I'm down on turn 3 now, you know, deal with it. And then you'd get different things again, because then, you know, you'd probably get fearsome decks that, you know, if Soraka had to attack, then we go with fearsome instead, you know. And so you'd get, like, that's what I kind of like. It's kind of change that would, it seems so minor, but it really might change a lot. Because if other aggro decks can't beat Soraka, you know, then they're struggling, and then they probably would have to go in a different direction, which I think is good for the game always, you know, to freshen things up. And if it's too strong, you know, you can always just revert it. But, you know, we've had, you know, it would be nice to see like a Soraka Tahm Kench. Oh, that's an S tier deck now all of a sudden. And I don't think that this would break it, so I am going to suggest that Soraka should be 2 attack instead. Now this one might be controversial, but we've seen a lot of reverts recently of certain cards that were, you know, deemed too good once upon a time, but then have been reverted, you know, as the game kind of, you know, slightly power creeps itself each sort of expansion, you know, so that the new things get played. Some of the old things are getting left behind. And what if we do a revert with Braum? What if we gave Braum his 1 attack back? Now this would be really interesting. This would be a pretty significant change, and would probably have a similar effect to the Soraka one, where, you know, it would slow the game down. The game would slow down, I think, somewhat significantly, because as soon as you give Braum 1 attack, he becomes a menace for aggro decks. Like, he becomes a real problem for those, like, aggressive type decks, because he can start picking off your units all of a sudden, and if you attack into him, you're probably just, you know, helping him level up, if we're being honest. So could it be done? I think it could. I genuinely don't think that Braum would be that problematic, and I think he would be really good. As soon as you give Braum 1 attack, I think he becomes a very, very strong champion. But, this is important, I don't think it would break Braum. I don't think that Braum all of a sudden would, like, completely break the game. I think he would be good, but I'm okay with that. Again, even if it's just, you know, until the next expansion comes out or whatever, I don't have a problem with Braum being in tier 1 decks again. You know, Freljord as a whole is kind of like not struggling. Like, it's not the worst region in the game, but it's like, you know, it isn't seeing too much play, and I feel like Braum could become the face of Freljord. You know, Braum could become one of those champions that you see quite often, and I think that would be nice. I think it would be nice to see a Braum, you know, come back into the fray and be strong again. And again, it would open up different kind of things, different archetypes that you don't normally see. I think that that would be a really nice change. Or I have another suggestion for Braum as well. And that is, what if Braum's level up effect, when he survives damage, he summons a Mighty Poro? What if, as well as this, he gave you a Poro Snacks in hand as well? Now, this would only be on the level up condition, of course, which I think Braum has quite a hard level up condition to fulfill, but this would make Braum like good for Poros, you know, because Poro decks have existed, but they kind of went away from Braum. But this might bring it back if you can level up Braum and get the free Poro Snacks every time he survives damage. That I think would be pretty impactful, and you'd be able to create like a cool combo deck with Braum where, you know, you try and level Braum up as quick as you can, get as many Poro Snacks as you can, just go crazy on your opponent with these, you know, 1-cost 6/6s or whatever. I think that that would be a nice change as well. And so, either of the two. Either of the two. And now Leona. And this is a change that I've suggested again once before, but I do think that this is would be such a good change. And that is, what if Leona, when leveled up, honestly, you could maybe even take away the stun. You take away the stun. You take away all of this leveled up text. But basically, anytime you activate Daybreak with Leona's level up, she gains 1/1 in stats. I think that this would be such a good change, because now all of a sudden Leona, you know, synergizes so well with stuff like Zenith Blade. Because now she's going to be a crazy big unit. You know, kind of like Viego, but obviously it only happens on the level up condition. And you know, it's interesting that I'm almost surprised they didn't do that, because Diana kind of does that already, right? You know, you play more Nightfall things in her leveled up form, and she keeps gaining attack, but she has quick attack and challenger, so she doesn't really need the extra health that much. Whereas with Leona, you know, I don't know, she got shortchanged somehow there. But if she kept gaining stats, now we can start to do things. Now you can start seeing decks with probably Freljord, maybe Noxus, maybe Demacia as well. You know, all of a sudden you've got decks there that could happen, that you can visualize it happening. You've got this big threat that you can go and give Overwhelm to. Any other region that kind of wants Overwhelm as well, you know, can use this. And, you know, you're going to have a mid-range beatdown deck, and it's going to be, you know, a lot of fun. And, you know, the Daybreak cards, all the rest of them are pretty good. So you'd have a deck ready-made, and I feel like you would really have a strong Targon mid-range presence, which we haven't really had that much of. I guess dragons would probably count. But outside of dragons for a short while, we haven't really seen too much Targon mid-range, and definitely not Daybreak, so I'm all for it. I'm a bit wary of time here, because I can see that we are getting up there, so I'll try and rush through these last couple. But Garen, you know, hasn't really seen much play in the past, and I think it's all to do with this leveled up form, you know, isn't doing that much when you have the attack token already. In fact, it does nothing when you have the attack token already. But we know now that whoever works at Riot loves the word free attack. You know, they found that idea and they just love it. So what if, you know, round start, rally, but if you have the attack token already, you can start a free attack. I think that that would be really useful for Garen, and would make him, you know, a threat worth considering. And, you know, all of a sudden you'd have Garen showing up, and I think it would just be a nice change. And they love the word free attack already, so why not add it on to Garen as well? Now we come to Heimer, and with Heimer, it's always an interesting choice of what to do with Heimer. But I think I found a solution. This, whatever is the 3-mana turret, is really important. It's super, super important. When it was elusive, it was too good. Heimer was too good. It was not fun to play against at all. Just don't do that again. But the fearsome turret, not good enough. You know, this really isn't cutting it quite enough. So what I think needs to happen is Heimer, you might have noticed, there is a keyword here that they don't have. That is, you know, an evergreen keyword that has been in the game since the start, but the turrets don't have it. And I don't actually know why they don't have it, but they don't. And it's lifesteal. And I think that if you made this 3-mana turret a lifesteal turret, you know, a 3-mana 3/1 with lifesteal, that would be quite impactful. We've already seen Eye of the Dragon and how impactful having, you know, lifesteal things can be. Obviously, these wouldn't have ephemeral; they would live on. And I think if you give these lifesteal, that gives you a reason to play Heimer, because as soon as you get Heimer down, then, you know, and you can start putting down these lifesteal things for free, the value you're gonna get. You know the game is gonna last some time. Your opponent is in trouble if they can't kill you, or kill Heimer pretty quick. And that's essentially what I think they want Heimer to be. And so by giving this lifesteal, eventually you're just going to outgrind them, because your Heimer will just, give you enough value to win the game eventually. So I feel like giving this turret lifesteal, it's much better than Elusive, because, Elusive just was ending the game really quick, which is not, I think, what they wanted. But lifesteal will sort of extend the game, allowing Heimer then to, utilize potentially the other turrets, like the Elusive one, to then end the game for him. And I think that would be a really significant good change. And then you could even give Fearsome to the T-Hex. Don't know why this doesn't have a keyword. Bit weird in my opinion that it doesn't. You could give this Fearsome. Why would you not give this Fearsome? I mean, look at it. Look at it. How does this not have Fearsome? It could have Fearsome, right? So, yeah. Lifesteal on this one. Fearsome on the T-Hex. And job is a good one, and Heimer will be happy, I'm sure. We quickly move on to Hecarim. This one, very easy change. This level up form just needs wording change. It needs a wording change so that even if Hecarim dies, the ephemeral allies keep their extra attack. So it would be something like, give ephemeral allies, 3+ attack. Or even, I guess it could be grant, right? They're ephemeral, so why not? It could be grant ephemeral allies +3 attack. Because they're ephemeral, so they're dying anyway. So I guess give and grant is kind of the same. Yeah. And that's all it needs to be. So that if Hecarim dies, they keep the effects, and we're good. That's all that needs to happen, I think, for Hecarim. As long as these keep their extra attack, we're good. And I hope that happens. And finally, Lux. This is another one that I've suggested before, and that is, if you aren't aware, like, Lux's mana for these spells, doesn't carry over. So if you play an 8 mana spell, you then have to play 6 mana again to get Lux leveled up. I would prefer it if, there was like a continuation. So if you played an 8 mana spell, you then have to play 4 mana to get the next Lux spark, etc, etc, etc. It carries over. It's pretty much common sense. And I always thought, could you not make this 5 as well? Are we not at a time where this could be 5? Again, I feel like that's a change that they honestly might make, just to see what happens, see if people start playing Lux again. But I do want the spells to kind of carry over. I don't, that's not going to break Lux. It's not going to it's not going to break anything to do with Lux, but it would be a nice change. And I think in conjunction with like a deal 5 to an enemy instead, you'd end up with a champion that's probably worth playing again, and that would be a nice change. And that is all of them, just under 30 minutes. That's good. And yeah. Interesting to see what you guys think about these changes. What would you change? As I say, there are ones in there that I think could do with more buffs as well, but I wasn't really satisfied with any changes that I could think of off the top of my head. So let me know what you guys think of those changes. What would you change? I do hope, tomorrow should be a balance patch, and it really should be. And as I say, even if they can't get that many nerfs in, they should get buffs in. There's no excuse for not buffing things. So, yeah, with that said, thank you so much for watching, and have a really nice day.